Greetings and salutations. Today we'll be covering the unsolved string of killings, better known as the Colonial Parkway Murders. The Colonial Parkway Murders were a series of unsolved homicides which occurred in Virginia between 1986 and 1989, which continue to baffle investigators and captivate the public more than 3 decades after they were committed. The killer, or killers, claimed the lives of 8 victims, all young couples, in and around the scenic Colonial Parkway, a historic roadway which links Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Yorktown. Despite the intense investigation, no one has ever been charged in connection to the murders, and the case remains one of the most notorious and haunting unsolved mysteries in America's history. The Colonial Parkway Murders occurred specifically in Southeast Virginia, and it is believed that a serial killer was responsible for the deaths. Colonial Parkway is a 22-mile-long road which passes through Colonial North Historic Parkway and intersects between Jamestown, Williamsburg, and Georgetown. It is a popular spot for young adults due to long stretches of roads and a lack of street maps or even lights. It became somewhat known as a secluded lover's lane. The murders would begin in 1986 and continued through 1989, with a total of 6 young individuals being murdered, with another 2 disappearing. Things would progress until the FBI believed that a serial killer was behind the crimes. The victims would include Kathy Thomas and Rebecca Dwowski, who were murdered in October 1986, David Lee Knobling and Robin Edwards, who were found no longer to be alive in September 1987. There's also Richard Keith Call and Cassandra Lee Haley, who disappeared in April 1988 and were never found. There's also Daniel Laurel and Anna Maria Phillips, who disappeared in September 1989, only to have their bodies discovered underneath a blanket near a rest stop. On October 9th, 1986, Rebecca Dwowski left college and headed home for Columbus Day weekend with her partner, Kathy Thomas. This would be the last time the couple would ever be seen. Their disappearance marked the start of the serial killings, which would eventually become known as the Colonial Parkway Murders. 3 days later, a jogger noticed damage to some bushes behind a parking area near Belfield Plantation. As he was jogging around 5:30 in the afternoon, the area was empty. This area was a small parking lot which could hold about 7 cars, and behind it was an embankment which dropped about 15 feet into the York River. The jogger discovered a car on the embankment and immediately decided to call the police. The park rangers arrived on the scene and initially assumed the car had accidentally driven over the edge. Cautiously, they would approach the Honda Civic and notice that the occupants were still within the vehicle. Upon breaking open the back window, they would discover the bodies of Kathy Thomas, aged 27, and Rebecca Dwowski, aged 21, no longer alive. Kathy was found in the rear of the vehicle, while Rebecca was found in the back seat. Both women had been murdered. The violence precipitated upon the couple was so that one could notice that their throats had been slashed from merely a glance. It is important to note that the Colonial Parkway Murders occurred on federal land, which would place the case under the FBI's jurisdiction. Once the FBI arrived in the scene, they would record that Kathy and Rebecca were found dead within the Honda Civic, and that the victims were fully clothed, and that there was no signs of them being violated or any form of robbery taking place. The FBI agents noted a strong odor of diesel coming from the vehicle, along with several burned matches at the scene. This would lead them to conclude that their killer had attempted to set the car on fire. However, the killer had failed to realize that diesel does not ignite like petrol. The agents would come to believe that the killer's second plan was to dump the car over the embankment into the river below. However, it seems that they were thwarted by the dense bushes and shrubbery along the embankment. Another observation that they would make was the lack of blood at the scene. The FBI would go on to determine that the women were slain elsewhere, then brought to the location where they would eventually be found. A search of the area would go on to fail to locate the precise site of the slayings. It wouldn't be until the autopsy where the findings would show that both Kathy and Rebecca had been subject to extreme levels of brutality before they were slain. Kathy's throat had been cut so severely that her head was nearly fully severed. Both women had ligature marks on their necks, suggesting that they might have been strangulated and they both showed signs of being manhandled while being alive, such as bruises. Rebecca had a small cut on her left thigh, while Kathy had a clump of hair still clutched in her hand, indicating that she may have tried to pull the hair out from her killer in a desperate attempt to save herself. It was determined that the killer would have had to been right-handed, due to the throats being cut from left to right. The cause of death for both women was respiratory arrest due to strangulation, making the cutting of their throats little more than a barbaric act of savagery after their deaths. On September 21st, 1987, 2 days after both Robin Edwards and David Knobling had been reported missing, David's Ford Ranger pickup truck was discovered parked at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. The scene was said to be an eerie sight, with both doors having been left open and the keys remaining in the ignition. The radio had still been playing music while the windshield wipers had been left on. Inside the vehicle, officials would find a pair of women's shoes, which Robin Edwards' mother identified as belonging to her daughter. This would be the first clear sign that David and Robin had been together that night. However, despite the odd findings, law enforcement decided to show of urgency in searching for the pair. This was due to Robin having had a history of running away. However, they were unable to explain the way the vehicle was found. On September 23rd, 2 days after David Knobling and Rebecca Edwards had been reported missing, at around 4 p.m., the body of Robin Edwards had been discovered as it had washed ashore along the James River at the Ragged Island Wildlife Refuge. Strangely enough, David was found 30 yards away, tangled in a series of roots. Robin Edwards had been executed with a firearm through the back of the head. David Knobling had suffered 2 firearm wounds, one to his shoulder and another to the back of his head. Law enforcement would believe the shoulder wound was caused whilst David was attempting to escape before the killer had a chance to execute him. Robin was found to be wearing a blouse and a pair of pants once her body was found, while David was found only wearing his pants. It is notable that Robin's wallet was missing. However, it is unclear if it was the killer who had taken it or if it had been lost down the river as her body was waterlogged. It must be noted that the discovery of David's Ford Ranger led some to believe that the scene itself had been staged by the killer, and there was some evidence which seemed to support this theory. For example, the radio still being on and the car keys being in the ignition, even though the radio had been wired to the battery in a way that would make it unnecessary to leave the car on in order to hear the radio. Additionally, David's family claimed that he always had parked his truck front facing out, which was not how the vehicle had been found. The clothing within the vehicle itself had been very neatly arranged, which seemed unlikely if the garments had been removed while the couple was enjoying themselves. These details led many to believe that the killer had purposefully arranged the scene, potentially to mislead any investigators. It must be noted that the question still remains of why 20-year-old David Knobling and 14-year-old Robin Edwards had arranged to meet on the night that they disappeared. It is unclear whether their meeting coincided with their deaths in any way. It is reported that David had had a long-standing relationship. That, added along to the age difference, does seem to point that they could have been together for something other than an adult encounter. There is a theory that the meeting was drug-related, where they either had been involved in a drug deal or witnessed one that they should not have. This is in part due to the location where David's truck was found having a reputation for being somewhat shady, and an area where drug deals often took place. However, the authorities believe that this case is directly tied to the others, regardless of the location. On April 9th, 1988, Keith Call, aged 20, and Cassandra Haley, aged 18, were at a party at Newport News. It is notable that this was their first time out together, yet it seemed that those who were around them did not consider it a proper date, since Keith had been in an on and off again relationship, and Cassandra apparently had not been looking for anything serious. The meeting was considered more of a social gathering rather than a romantic outing. At around 1:30 a.m., the couple left the party as Cassandra had detailed that she had to arrive home by 2 a.m. Unfortunately, this was the last time anyone would see the pair alive. On April 10th, 1988, Richard Call, the father of Keith Call, was on his way to work around 7 in the morning when he spotted his son's car parked at the York River Overlook turnoff. This would cause him to pull over to check out the area, where he noticed that the driver's door had been slightly ajar. When he opened it, he noted that his son's watch was still in the car, along with Cassandra's purse, being seated in the passenger seat. This, along with several empty beer cans, had caused Richard to assume that Keith and Cassandra had taken a walk on the beach, which caused him to return to his car as he headed off to work. The authorities would eventually be called, however this would be an hour after Richard had discovered the car. This was due to park ranger John Seger having stumbled upon the vehicle, and it is very important to note that the scene that he had stumbled upon appeared to be significantly different than the one that Kenneth's father had happened upon. This time, almost all of Kenneth's clothing had been found inside the car, including his wallet, which had been folded up and placed in the backseat of the car, and one of Cassandra's boots, along with her bra, were apparently also present. There is also the fact that another wallet was found, containing $12, while Cassandra's own wallet and some of her jewelry were purported to be missing. This would cause Richard Call to, for the rest of his life, wondered how he had failed to notice the clothing, the keys, or the wallets. According to Danny Plot, a detective who worked on the Colonial Parkway Murder Task Force, the park rangers actually discovered the car first, but they didn't report it right away. By his account, they took some of the belongings, hoping to identify who had abandoned the vehicle, and only later, when they realized it might not have been an abandoned car, did they return the items to the vehicle. However, Richard Call had already seen and inspected the car before the park rangers were able to return the items. However, it must be noted that he claims that the rangers did not admit to their mistake but would rather stay silent, whereas the FBI would criticize the park rangers for their mishandling of the crime scene in both the Dosky Thomas case and the Call Haley case. This would go so far as to have members within the FBI imply that the case potentially involved a member of the park rangers being behind the Colonial Parkway murders and deliberately sabotaging the crime scenes. However, in spite of this, the press and the family members had already linked the Call Haley case to the other Colonial Parkway murders, especially after noting that Kathy Thomas's Honda Civic was found just a mile away from where Keith Call's Toyota Celica had been found. However, the park rangers supposedly believed that Call and Haley had gotten into trouble while skinny dipping, meaning that this would have not had any connection to the Colonial Parkway murders. But seeing as the FBI had already been criticizing them for their handling of the case, it does put a significant amount of doubt into the park rangers' claims. It would not be until years later that the park rangers would admit that they had initially come across the vehicle and removed some of the belongings, which they later attempted to put back once they realized they had not been dealing with an abandoned car. When Keith's father had inspected the car, he had believed that he had failed to notice these items. However, due to the admittance by the park rangers, it is likely that they were just not there. Stranger still was that the FBI only found out about the missing couple when Special Agent John Marbury heard about it over the radio. The FBI ordered a massive search and scouring of the area. However, unfortunately, Keith Call and Cassandra Haley would never be found. The car was checked for fingerprints. However, it is noted and stressed that the park rangers' haphazard management of the crime scene resulted in a large number of prints being on the vehicle. However, the FBI still held hope that the couple might still have been alive, as there was no evidence discovered either in the car or in the area around the car, which would suggest that the couple had been killed, and the potential motive for abducting them would remain unclear. In September 1989, Daniel Laurer accepted an invitation from his brother Clinton to travel to Virginia Beach for Labor Day weekend in order to spend time with his girlfriend, Anna Maria Phelps. Not wanting to make the long journey alone, Daniel invited his friends, Joe and Janet Godsley, along with their 18-month-old daughter. During the weekend's partying, Clinton offered Daniel to leave his family home and come to live with them in order to start a new life. Daniel would accept the invitation and decided to put the plan into action. On September 4th, 1989, Daniel returned home with the Godsleys in order to collect his things so he could start a new life in Virginia Beach. Anna Maria accompanied them on their journey with the intent of visiting her family while Daniel was collecting his belongings. After spending time at Anna Maria's house, Daniel and Anna Maria began their return journey back to Virginia Beach. It would be after 11 p.m. that they were driving eastbound, supposedly on I-64 through New Kent County, when something went terribly wrong. Sadly, they would never complete their journey. Concerned, Clinton, along with a female colleague of his, would go out to look for Daniel and Anna Maria. As they had not returned home, they decided to turn back just before reaching the rest area due to low fuel and the lack of money. Had they made it to the westbound rest area, Clinton and his female colleague would have spotted Daniel's car. The next morning, Daniel Lauer and Anna Maria Phelps would fail to return home, and a state transportation official would find Daniel's car parked near an exit ramp designated for trucks. It was supposedly half on the shoulder and half on the road, at a rather strange angle near a no parking sign. This drew the attention of Virginia state troopers who were about to have the car towed, and just as he was about to make the call, a missing persons report came through the radio. The state trooper decided to take a look at the car and noticed that the window on the driver's side was partly down. He noted a roach clip decorated with feathers dangling from it, which was stated by others to have always hung on the rearview mirror. The passenger's side door was locked, but the driver's side wasn't, and the keys were still in the ignition. Although this was definitely noted as rather curious, there was no direct evidence of any struggle having occurred. The investigation into the disappearance of Daniel and Anna Maria began with the Virginia State Police conducting a search for them. Dogs were used in order to track their scent. However, they were unable to find any trail leading away from the car. It was initially believed that the car may have been abandoned where it was due to a mechanical issue or a lack of fuel. However, upon further inspection, it was shown that the car was in good and operating condition with enough gas to continue to be driven. Despite the 3-day search in the area where the car was found, including the use of a helicopter, neither hide nor hair of the couple could be found. The families reported a series of items that were missing, including $800, which Daniel's father had given him, along with Anna Maria's purse, which had carried her own money, and a brown electric blanket. The connection between the missing persons case of Daniel and Anna Maria and the other Colonial Parkway murders quickly made it to the press. The Virginia State Police also saw a connection themselves, but unlike the press, they downplayed it in order to avoid causing a panic without there being any solid proof that a serial offender had committed all these murders. There were also doubts due to the distance between New Kent and Colonial Parkway. There were a series of potential eyewitnesses who had claimed to have seen Daniel and Anna Maria. This caused the theory of an abduction to become prevalent. Unfortunately, the discovery of the remains of Anna Maria and Daniel would put an end to these theories, including the theory that they had run away together and eloped. On October 19, 1989, a couple of deer hunters discovered 2 human skeletons in the woods near the westbound rest area. The New Kent County Sheriff's Department was informed of a brown blanket being found at the scene, which immediately linked this to the Lauer Phillips case. Although there was no visual identification that could be made due to 6 weeks of exposure to the elements along with animal activity, the medical and dental records allowed a positive identity confirmation to be made. The 2 bodies that had been found in the woods were indeed Anna Maria and Daniel. After the discovery of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer's remains, the medical examiner was challenged with the task of finding a definitive link between their deaths and the Colonial Parkway murders. It was noted that the bones around the neck area of both individuals showed potential signs of strangulation. However, there was nothing conclusive. The examiner found only one clear case of a knife being used on Anna Maria, and that was only on her fingers, which was an unhealed cut, which was indicated to have happened near the time of her death. There were no gunshot wounds found, but the cause of death could still be considered that of a bullet or a knife, due to the results of decomposition, which made it significantly more difficult to suss out anything. Most of the investigators and those involved with the case believed that a knife was the most likely murder weapon. Despite the uncertainty, the deaths of Anna Maria Phelps and Daniel Lauer would be officially declared the last of the Colonial Parkway murder case. As we look back on the chilling events of the Colonial Parkway murders, we are reminded that the passage of time does not lessen the weight of unanswered questions. While over 30 years have passed since the first murders took place, there has been little hope for justice, but hope still remains. In 2018, reports surfaced around a potential perpetrator being linked thanks to DNA samples that had been collected in 3 out of the 4 cases. However, it remains unclear whether each sample links to a different perpetrator or if they all linked to a singular individual. Despite this breakthrough, the case remains unsolved, and as of now, no one has been charged in relation to these crimes. The mystery of the Colonial Parkway murders continues to haunt many to this day, and we can only hope that the truth will one day be uncovered. If you remained with me until the end, I thank you, and I do hope you stay tuned and subscribe for more content.